Think AP just pays invoices? Stick around while we discuss how AP works with 12 different groups within the company, including the CEO, CFO, tax department, and purchasing.
Welcome to the AP Now podcast, the podcast that covers trends, insights, and emerging issues impacting every accounts payable function.
Welcome to the 100th episode of the AP Now podcast. To celebrate, we have a very special guest and a special topic. I'm joined today by Jamie Radford, founder of the AP Association in the UK, and my co-founder of the AP Rockstar program, where we help professionals with public speaking and networking. And today we're going to discuss what I call strategic AP, how accounts payable partners with other departments. So Jamie, let's get right into it. Let's start at the top with the CEO. How do you see accounts payable partnering with the CEO of their organizations?
Well, look, Mary, I think that the word strategic has got its own legs now, and actually finding a sort of a place at the table with the CEO is actually come to the fore in recent years. So strategically managing the relationship with the CEO is a very important factor. It's very much around promoting what the AP team does, making sure they're a strategic partner of businesses. And again, the CEO of any organization may years gone by not even know who the accounts payable teams are.
Right.
But actually, over the last 12 months, I'm pretty sure they know exactly who the accounts payable teams are. How about you, Mary?
Yep, that's absolutely correct. I think, as we've said many times, this is AP's year to shine. But one of the places, at least in the States, where I see AP helping is when they review payments for Foreign Corrupt Practices Act potential violations. So we call it FCPA over here. And sometimes people say to me, well, why do you train the accounts payable department on that? And the answer is simple. They're the last set of eyes to see the money before it goes out the door. And in the US, an FCPA violation or investigation is horrific. So you want to avoid that at all costs. And the accounts payable department helps the CEO on that front. And I know you have legislation in the UK that's even more stringent than ours.
We do. We have several. So one of them is the anti-bribery rule. So that effectively is where, people might be bribed in taking a bribe to win business. Now, ultimately, the CEO or the CFO are responsible for those. But very similar, actually, Mary, we have other legislative items similar to Sarbanes-Oxley, where ultimately if people are found to be breaking process or fraudulently behaving, both the CEO and the CFO are effectively responsible for those. That's where the accounts payable teams really come into their own as well. Very similar in the UK. We've got new legislation coming out, which will be very similar to Sarbanes-Oxley also.
Okay. And that's been a real, it was needed, don't get me wrong, but it has been a real thorn in the side for some organizations here. So it's interesting that you mentioned the CFO, because I have he or she next on the list, and kind of some of the things that accounts payable does with the CEO. It's interchanged with the CFO. And you mentioned, or I think you mentioned, cash flow. And of course, accounts payable has the cash out and a good handle generally on what's going on. So they will also assist the CFO on that. Do you see that also?
Very much so, yes. So cash is a big, obviously at the moment with, we're just coming out of the back end of the worst pandemic ever. The cash is king in every business. And, predominantly accounts payable or accounts payable managers may not see themselves as having a direct impact on cash, but they absolutely do. Tighter controls, better payment reporting practices. That's where all this cash comes from, which directly impacts the CFO.
Yeah. And the other thing I see the accounts payable doing, which the CFO would definitely appreciate, is trying to make sure that they earn all those early payment discounts, because that's, cash right to the bottom line. And so when you talk about the CFO, it also is very closely related to Treasury. And I know in some organizations in the US, there is no treasurer. It's just the controller. So we see CFO and Treasury, and again, data helping to do cash forecasting, which at least I know when I worked in Treasury was a big issue.
Yeah, very similar in the UK and in Europe as well, Mary, that, Treasury functions obviously have their part. They have their part around cash flow management, about forecasting, about budgeting, and all the good stuff that treasurers are there. But, the silo approach that used to be there for accounts payable is no more. They need to work very hand in hand with their Treasury partners.
Right. And I even, I had a question from one of my readers a while ago, and she said, our accounts payable department is in Treasury. Does that make sense to you? And it made perfect sense to me. So I thought that was kind of interesting. The other thing I see is accounts payable coming up with data for any special projects that any of these professionals might want to undertake. Okay, let's talk about, the 800-pound gorilla in relationships with accounts payable, and that is purchasing. And of course, this is where purchasing and accounts payable are not together in a procure to pay operation. But with purchasing, again, data that the accounts payable department has, they can provide great insights to purchasing that will help them negotiate better contracts. Like the company is buying the same widget from 3 or 4 different vendors, they can give them that data so that maybe they can negotiate for a lower price if they buy from fewer, etc. So do you see that over there too?
Yeah, absolutely, Mary. There's a saying in the UK, the devil's in the detail.
Yeah.
And it absolutely is. That's the truth. There's the data that comes through from both procurement and accounts payable. But if these two organizations don't work hand in hand, you're absolutely right. You're not going to get the best out of your supply chain. Far too often do I talk to procurement and AP teams about the benefit of working together. And the biggest benefit really is that age-old thing where AP suddenly get a new supplier that sends hundreds of invoices a day, a week, a month, or whatever, because the procurement team didn't realize that the transactional value of invoices was not part of the contract when they were negotiating. So it's a two-way street. It's not only about trying to save money and be efficient, but it also is understanding the both functions. So strategically, on that list there, purchasing or procurement is so important to the world of accounts payable.
Yep. The other thing that I see, at least in the United States, is many times companies in the same industry have the same payment terms. They may not talk about it. They're not supposed to talk about it, but they will have the same payment terms. So if accounts payable goes through the data and they say, oh, we're buying widgets from A, B, C, and D, and A, B, and C are offering early payment discounts and company D isn't, they can give that information to procurement so that when they go to negotiate a contract, maybe they can get that early payment discount from that vendor who just forgot to mention it.
And I think you're right. And also, Mary, I think the thing there is that it's really important that when procurement or purchasing are having those strategic meetings with their suppliers and their vendors, they include the accounts payable teams also. And that's going back to your point about AP being a strategic function. Make sure, if there's AP teams out there listening to this, get your seat at that table. Make sure you're in those meetings with your procurement folk.
Right. And as we go through this, AP people, if you're listening to it, just take note of all the different things that you do. And I'm hoping that there are some controllers, some CFOs, some CEOs, or other high-level managers who are listening to this and will realize all the value that their accounts payable team brings to the table. Okay, I will get off my soapbox now. And let's talk about accounting, another entity which I believe has a lot of interaction with the accounts payable department. Right off the bat, when you have your month-end, quarter-end, and year-end closes, accounts payable is a really big part of that.
Yeah, and in most organizations we work with, the accounting function is one of the most important areas they work with, but it seems to be always at the end of the month or the end of the quarter or the end of the year.
Mm-hmm.
Again, a bit of advice is work with these folk every day. Find out how what they're doing, shadow what they're doing, follow what your AP do. When you do your month-end reports in the accounts payable world, don't print them off, put them in a drawer and forget all about them. Action them, have some KPIs, work with your accounting folk. When these journals are happening where errors have occurred, understand why the errors have occurred, try and fix the problem at source. That's how you become more strategic and more value to a function going forward.
Yep. Okay. Before we talk about audit, I want to invite listeners to subscribe and hit that bell on the top to be notified of new episodes, which we post 2 or 3 times a week. Okay. Now the other biggie, Jamie. Oh, I'm jumping ahead. I was going to talk about tax, but first let's talk about audit. For starters, at least over here, looking for duplicate payments. Sometimes that's in accounts payable, sometimes it's audit, sometimes the two groups work together. It just depends.
Yes, so in the UK, very similar to yourselves, Mary, we've got what we call recovery auditors. So they come in and they find overpayments, duplicates, VAT, tax issues that you might have. But then also you have the internal and external auditors. They're the professional bodies that come in. And also internal external auditors have their price to pay in making AP strategic. So once they give you advice, they come in and say, you've got to put better controls in place, work with those auditors, you will become better, you'll become best practice by following some of the guidance of these auditors.
One of the things we tell accounts payable departments is if you have any extra resources, try and do a little bit of that audit yourself, like a vendor statement audits, so you can recover the money for the company without having to pay a third party who may or may not be expensive.
Yep.
Okay, tax. I'm always talking to you about 1099s, and we're set it up over here to have another big 1099 year, and I don't say that in a positive way. There've been some more changes, and also President Biden is looking for extra money for what he calls enforcements, which I have to tell you, as a taxpayer, makes a lot of sense, because every dollar they spend, they say they recover $5. So to me, it's kind of a no-brainer, but that's going to mean more 1099 audits, which is independent contractor reporting. But also our folks will work with the tax department when B notices come in, B notices, or when the IRS says the data that you gave them didn't quite match what they have on their records. That's a real fun task. And also with sales and use tax.
Yeah.
So, but you have your own unique tax item issues, don't you?
We do indeed. We have this little thing called the VAT. We have, as many countries around the world have, you have tax issues which are local to your entity or your country. VAT is a very important part of the UK economy. With where we've gone, again, for the last 12 months, every business has been impacted. So yes, I think the VAT rules will change. I think they'll be more stringent. I think the UK government will be looking to collect more taxes, clearly, so we can get the economy going. But VAT is a big part of the UK. But in the world of accounts payable, it is very important that you understand the rules, you educate yourself in how that's sort of officiated in the UK. And also, when you're paying invoices and you're utilising VAT on invoices, that you know what you're doing. You're not just seeing a number down the bottom. You understand fundamentally that you're collecting money on behalf of the UK government. So it's important to understand how you do that as well.
So let me ask a real dummy question, which I probably should have asked you off camera. Do the VAT rates change a lot?
You know what, historically they have a little, way back when it was sort of 10-11%, it's up as much as 20% at the moment. And there is talk at the moment about that maybe increasing as well. But the one thing I would say about the UK government is they've been very flexible. So where it becomes over the last 12 months, they've reduced VAT in hospitality so that people can try and get more trade. Right. So it tends not to vary very often. I don't know if it's the same in the States, but when it does change, it changes a lot because you have to change ERP systems, rules, you have to update all learning material. So it changes a little bit, but not very often.
So we have 7,000 different taxing entities, each state, and then some of the cities and the counties, and they all tax different things. So it's quite an endeavor. But okay, I'm not going to make you sit down and cry, which I want to do sometimes when I look at sales and use tax. Okay, let's talk about travel, the travel department. We haven't had a whole lot of travel in the last year. I suspect in 2022 we'll have a lot of it. People, have all this pent-up demand, if you will. I know I'm ready to go. But I see accounts payable working with travel in setting the policy. Typically, I feel bad sometimes for accounts payable because they reject something on an expense report and the traveler is down yelling at them, carrying on, when all they're doing is enforcing the policy or administering the policy that was set up by management and HR. So they kind of get, the short end of the stick on that. Is it the same way over there?
Yeah, absolutely, Mary. Again, in the UK, it's slightly different. Sometimes the travel and entertainment department sits within accounts payable.
Yes.
And sometimes it sits outside as well. But the one thing I will say, which again for the listeners of your podcast, that if you to look at the travel policy of a company, every person in the company gets it, and everybody in a company probably reads it and understands it, because at some time they're going to reclaim some money that's due back to themselves.
Right.
Now, I bet you can't say the same for the accounts payable policy. It's on demand. It only really impacts certain people. And do they follow it all the time? So if you look at policy for policy, travel policies are usually followed a little bit better than accounts payable, but they're very similar by nature. You're paying people or companies in the same way.
One of the things I tell accounts payable folks here about their policy is to have pieces of it that are important to other departments and just print out those 1 or 2 pages, because it's going to be impossible to get the rest of the company to read the whole manual, nor should we really expect them. But folks in the UK must be better when it comes to travel than folks in the US. In US companies, I would say only 10% of the travelers read the policy, maybe 20%.
There you go. Well, you've got you travel on airplanes around your own country, let alone around the world. We can jump in a car and we can travel up and down. But yes, I would say people do follow the travel policy a lot better than they do the accounts payable policy in the UK.
Yep. Okay. All right. So I have down next the finance department. And for the finance department, it's similar to Treasury. It's similar to the CFO. Is accounts payable can be a wealth of information for any project so that they have. So for example, when they want to know, how much did we spend on steel, or how much did we spend on such and such, or how much did this department spend on such and such, AP has that information. And while I think some companies do take advantage of it, many of them don't realize that they have this resource.
Yeah, I think you're right there, Mary. I'd agree with you totally. In the UK, finance is effectively the same as accounting in terms of terminology, but actually in terms of growth of a business and ultimately looking at better suppliers, better customers and data, you're absolutely right. I don't think people realize or utilize the information that accounts payable has. And let's be honest, you and I have spoken many a time. If you ever want to get a full grounding of a business, go take a day in accounts payable. You get to know everything about a business and the running of a business. And that actually applies to the data as well.
Yep. I think one of the funniest stories, you shared this, or Rachel shared this, Rachel Long, that she said, well, you tell them. You tell the story.
You carry on, you Terry. You can tell.
Okay, so she said that when they were in lockdown at her company, she's at Breeden, the AP staff was going into the office, and for the first time ever, they got to meet, was it the CEO?
But actually, the CEO and the CFO, both of them on that list, came down and visited them to show how much they meant to them, and also fundamentally understand what those teams did, which was absolutely amazing.
And didn't the CEO come down for AP Appreciation Week?
They did come down for the cakes, I think, Mary. But they came, but they actually, you know what? Not only did they come down, but they got involved. They got photos. They met the team. They really did show some appreciation to those teams, which actually means that accounts payable are more valued and becoming more strategic to organizations. And Breeden are a very large organization in the UK.
Yeah. So CFOs, if you happen to be listening, a visit might scare your AP staff at first, but it will be appreciated. And didn't they also say that people were afraid of the accounts payable department?
They did, Mary. They said that we're a scary bunch, apparently. And look, we've got happy, smiley faces, and we've been in accounts payable a long time. And I think we joked about this, but accounts payable people are not scary. We're very good at following a process. We've got very good data, and we try and do a good job all the time. That's what people find scary. It's not the people. I think it's the process.
Yeah, the process, and the fact that the people in accounts payable are administering whatever policy management set up. They don't make the policy. They just have to administer it. But so they're I like to say in accounts payable, on a good day, you break even.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's it. I like that one.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move on and let's talk about HR. We don't normally think about HR and accounts payable, but actually there are quite a few areas where they have to interact. The first one that comes to mind, with me anyway, is in the US, when you let somebody go, when somebody's terminated, you have to give them their paycheck on the last day. And it's often very difficult for payroll to get that last paycheck out because they have no notice. So it often goes through accounts payable. They'll draw the check.
Yeah, and it's similar in the UK. The one thing I would say about the HR department is again, about one of your favorite subjects, Mary, fraud. If you're not engaging with the HR department strategically around the starters and the leavers process, you can have people on your approval lists or in the expenses process that can still potentially get access to your system, approve people's expenses or invoices. So you need to really engage with your HR folk and make sure the starters and the leavers process are really engaged and also joined up between that and the AP process.
Yeah, because if you have a weakness in your system, you can be guaranteed your employees know where it is. And a few of them, unfortunately, will take advantage of it. One of the areas where some companies have a problem, at least in the US, is that HR sometimes is not good about notifying them when somebody has left the company, regardless of the reason, whether it's from their, they left voluntarily or the company invited them to leave. And, this opens the company up to, if the employee had a credit card, a few employees have been known to use that after the fact. And similarly, if they have access to the ERP, which, as we move more and more remotely, more and more employees do have access to remotely. One of the things that we tell people over here, and I have to tell you, not a huge number of companies do it, but I recommend all the time that they do it, is that AP work with HR and they get the addresses of all employees and they run those addresses against the master vendor file to try and identify potential fraudulent vendors or phony vendors that an employee has set up so that the check will go to their house. And people will, and it's easy to do. It's so easy, Jamie, even I could do it. I could teach you how to do it in Excel. And, people say, well, isn't that a load of extra work? And my answer to that is no, it's not. It's rather simple, number one. And number two, I was at a live setting and I was talking about this. And a woman in the front raised her hand and she said, at our company, every time we set up a new vendor, we do this. And she said, in the last 6 years, we found 2 instances where employees were trying to set up phony vendors. So, yeah. So, but HR typically will give you the addresses. The other 2 things that sometimes work is checking against the tax identification number, which sometimes they won't give you for privacy reasons. I go back and forth on that one. And the other one is the bank account numbers, which again, sometimes they say there's a privacy issue. So, but again, you can work with HR. One last place, you kind of alluded to it, Jamie, is if there's a fraud. If you suspect an employee of fraud, don't start by pointing a finger because you could be wrong. That's really ugly, but get HR involved immediately.
I think you're right there, man. I think it's the age-old thing. You've got to investigate. Make sure you've got all your so what we call the ducks in the row in the UK. Make sure you've got all your evidence before you go forward, because also not only do you don't want to make sure you've got the wrong person or you accuse somebody incorrectly, but also you want to make sure you don't tip them off too quickly, so they can try and cover the tracks, which quite clearly people try. So get engaging with your HR folk very early. Not only covers you as an individual, but also the function at large as well.
Yeah. In the AP Technology Week, which we're going to have in a few weeks, we have a woman coming to speak about fraud and embezzlement. And it's quite interesting. I mean, her stories are amazing and they're continual. I mean, she comes up with a new 1 or 2 every week. So it's an ongoing issue. Okay, let's talk now about all employees. AP, I like to tell AP, as soon as you hear about a new fraud, share the information with everyone. If you see an area where your employees are making a mistake on expense reports and it's happening a few times, it's more likely, the policy than them. And you might provide extra training or extra information or tighten your policy. Do you see other ways that AP works with all employees?
Yeah, look, Mary, I think it's not only the fraud. I think you're absolutely right that you need to share that information. Communication is really key, but also far too often, you and I speak about this all the time about where organizations have like roadshows. AP folk go out and try and explain the policy and how important AP are. You need to do that all the time. You need to be singing from the tops of trees. You need to be telling people, from your CEO, your CFOs, your controllers, anybody, the good work that AP does. But also that applies to telling all of the employees. If they know who you are, what your policy is, where you're based, why you do what you do, there's more likely they're going to support you and also promote you to others as well. That's what I would do with all employees.
Right. Okay. Because if you start to have a good relationship with them, you'll have fewer problems. And when there is a problem, it will be easier to resolve. So I'm quite impressed with all the things that the accounts payable folks can and do. And I hope that there's a few CFOs out there listening who also will see the wonderfulness of the AP staff. One of the things that I find, Jamie, is accounts payable professionals sometimes are reluctant to sing their own praises.
Yep.
And it's a fine balance. You don't want to be that braggart who's always saying, look at me, look what I did. But on the other hand, if you hide your light under a bushel, nobody will see it.
Absolutely. I totally agree there, Mary. I think you're right. If any CEOs or CFOs are watching this, as one, you and I are effectively CEOs of our own business.
Yes,
we understand the value of accounts payable, but ultimately, you're right. It's about promoting yourself as an individual or as a department, but also it also involves CFOs, CEOs, showing that respect, understanding what these teams do, the hard work they have to do. And that's yours and my job to keep educating everybody about the great work between the two functions, all of the businesses that you've got to keep pushing and promoting wherever possible.
And a big hats off to you, Jamie, because you do an excellent job on promoting the AP Association and the AP professionals. They're lucky to have you.
Thank you, and you.
Okay. All right. You might also like episode 79 on invoice automation surprises. If you're watching this on YouTube, a link to it will appear to the left. And as always, we always appreciate those thumbs up.